I'm so glad that we can have a nice, calm game just to chill out on a Sunday night in which everyone still has their voice and doesn't sound like a smoker who went through 3 packs a day for the past 40 years. Grossi Posse Packer Nation. Welcome to another episode of Packcast, the podcast where you don't have to be a Packers fan, but it sure does help. I'm your host, Tom. My voice is shot because of Mason Crosby and the refs, Grossi. And tonight, this morning, we will be breaking down the Packers' victory over the 49ers, 30-28 on Sunday Night Football. Before we get to that, I want to do a big shout out and thank you to some brand new patrons and YouTube members. First, on the Patreon side of things, we have Tanner Mike up in their membership. A big shout out and thank you to you. And over on the YouTube membership side of things, we have Jacob Hall. We have ISPLZXH Green. We have Slaterman and Dusky. A big shout out and thank you to you all. So it is currently 1:45 Eastern time in the morning. And holy frackin' crap, what a game. Honestly, just incredible. And going into this game, I know many Packers fans were incredibly nervous about this game. And honestly, justifiably so. David Bakhtiari out until at least the end of week 6. Elton Jenkins, a guy who was going to fill in for him, left tackle, also out. So you look at Bosa line up over there and you're like, okay, this could go pretty wrong. On top of that, Zadarius Smith is on IR. Kevin King, which I know people were happy about, which, again, it provides depth at the very least. Kevin King was announced that he was out as well. Dominic Daphne. And so going into this, you're like, crap, the defensive line and pass rush is going to struggle. On top of that, the offensive line is going to struggle against a very good 49ers pass rush. And it turned out that the Green Bay Packers got out to a frackin' start. Right before half, leading at a time 17-0, except right before half, in which the 49ers were able to score. And you're like, oh, okay, well, the Packers are looking good. The offensive line was looking real good. A big shout out to Yosh Neiman, who had a hell of a game. Who this is his first start since 2018. Didn't allow a single sack. Looked frackin' great. The O-line as a whole only allowed 3 sacks. Rodgers, for the most part, had a bunch of protection. And so this honestly went as good as it possibly could in terms of the offensive line. The Packers were able to at least get after Jimmy G a little bit. There was constant pressure. There was 3 sacks on the night. And looking at the stats here before we dive into like the refs and the game winner, Rodgers 23 for 33, 261 yards and 2 touchdowns. Aaron Jones 19 for 82 with a touchdown. Devontae Adams 12 receptions, 132 yards and a touchdown. MVS 3 for 59 with 1 TD. And looking at the performance, you have to be happy with Joe Barry. You know, obviously the second half, the Packers allowed more points and more yards because in the entire game, Jimmy G, 25 for 40, 257 yards, 2 touchdowns and an interception. You had Sermon, 10 for 31, 1 touchdown, so we were able to hold the run game to very low totals here. Kittle, 7 for 92, and Deebo Samuel, who led the league in the first 2 weeks in receiving yards, only 5 for 52. But there's a lot of narratives that are around this game, and let's break these down. After a pretty dominant first half by the Packers, the 49ers started crawling their way back, and a lot of the reasons why they were able to was because of the referees. And if you've been watching this channel for any stretch of time, you know that I do not like to talk about the referees. I don't like to blame the referees for things, but I will call it out when it needs to. And there was a lot of ticky-tacky BS when it came to pass interference, in which there was calls and no calls, and that was just garbage. But the thing that stood out, you had the potential intentional grounding by Jimmy Garoppolo, which wasn't called. And you're like, okay, move on. It is what it is. But LaFleur was super pissed about that. That was obnoxious. But the big thing that really stood out, it wasn't even roughing the passer. It was the blatant hit on Devontae Adams, who was a defenseless receiver, which knocked him out of the game for a short time. And then Devontae came back and literally made that final drive. We'll talk about that in a second. But if you're going to call like a pass interference, which Eric Stokes like lightly taps a receiver, or you're going to call roughing the passer where a defender literally touches Jimmy G on the shoulder, you're not going to call that. So it was just bad officiating for both sides. And it's something that you don't want to even be talking about in the post game because you shouldn't have to talk about it. And that kind of was just infuriating. But this all led to the 49ers eventually getting the ball, going down the field, scoring, and taking the lead for the first time by 1 and leaving 37 seconds on the clock. Which Packers fans looked at this and are like, all right, well, that's too much time, but there's no timeouts for the Packers. And the way that the game has been going, you, of course, have some question marks. But in those 37 seconds, Aaron Rodgers, Davante Adams go down 42 yards on the final drive, spike it. Mason Crosby hits a 51-yard field goal to win the game 30-28. So this was a big relief as the Packers, when they usually go to California, especially against the 49ers, they've lost the past 6 out of the 9 games against the 49ers. It's a relief. We usually have a really tough time beating the 49ers, especially in Santa Clara, which it just seems we're always playing them there. And so, yeah, this was a big weight off of the shoulders here. Packers overall had 7 penalties for 87 yards. A lot of those very questionable. But what this means, the Packers are 2-1. They're sitting atop the NFC North, even though the Lions almost won today. But a fun stat is in that 42-yard drive, the Bears had 47 yards the entire game. So that final drive was almost longer than the entire Bears offense today. So it's just a fun little stat. The Vikings did wind up beating the Seahawks to get their first win of the season, but the Lions losing a heartbreaker, a 66-yard field goal with Justin Tucker, and you also had the Bears getting dominated by the Browns. So right now, the Packers are back up top at Kings of the North. We have the Steelers next week, who got beaten bad by the Cincinnati Bengals, and you definitely do question the validity, I guess, of the Steelers. However, they didn't have TJ Watt, so if TJ Watt is back, that is definitely going to be a challenge. You hope to have Elton Jenkins back. And I think the last thing I would definitely want to talk about is Aaron Rodgers. And if you haven't seen this, I highly recommend. The NFL's tweeted out. I retweeted it. Aaron Rodgers, waiting for the Mason Crosby field goal, as soon as he hits it, goes absolutely nuts. And he is cheering and pumping his arms. And I hope that it won't, but I hope that for Packers fans, this clears any doubt in your mind that he is not invested in this football team, because you go watch that man wants to win. That man is playing his heart out, and that man frackin' loves football. So that was a beautiful thing to see. A game that was infuriating at pretty much a good chunk of the time comes down to the very, very end. The Packers exercise the 49ers demons, at least for a hot second, and it is on to week 4. But let me know what you feel about this game down in the comments below. How'd you feel about the refs? How do you feel about the offense, the defense, the 49ers, etc.? Let me know. You can always find me at TomGrossiComedy.com or at TomGrossiComedy, all social media you see down below. Check out podcasts on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play Music, Spotify, and of course YouTube. And a big shout and thank you to all the patrons over at patreon.com/TomGrossiComedy and the YouTube members. But thank you so much for watching. I'm Tom Grossi. And as always, go Pack Go.